Okay, welcome to Sanuka School Skills and Drills. Here we are again for another touch and go interview series. This interview series is for the upliftment of Dr. Moses Powell and his system, Sanuka School Jiu-Jitsu. It's also designed to benefit and help the new, young, and up-and-coming Sanuka students so that they can hear from the masters who have been taught directly by Dr. Moses Powell. And in this case, we have a master who was taught directly by Grand Professor V, the teacher of Dr. Moses Powell. And today I would like to introduce to you all Shehan Scott from VAJ, a longtime student of Grand Professor V, and he's now with Professor David James. They're doing a magnificent job in Brooklyn and Staten Island, representing the system of Grand Professor V. So welcome, Shehan Scott.
Yes.
I want to say professor because I'm so used to saying professor, but it's Shehan Scott. So we want to start this interview. We're not going to take long. I'm sure that there are a lot of people in Sanukas, and a lot of people claim V-Jitsu or VAJ or talk about Grand Professor V. But today we have someone who is an authority on the system and who trained with the man himself personally. So let's get started. Again, this is for those who are new, up and coming. Even some of the masters are going to benefit from this because we're going to be traveling around, talking to different masters for the benefit of all the students. So here we go. So when did you first come into V-Jitsu, and how old were you, and how was it when you first met Grand Professor V?
Well, I came to the system in 1976. I was 21 years old at the time, and I met Professor V at my father's school. My father was a student of Professor V's.
Oh, what was your father's name?
His name's Harold Stewart.
Harold Stewart, okay, go ahead.
And so I met Professor V through my father. My father was studying with Professor V from the early 70s. And Professor V used to come down to my father's school and teach. So that's why I met him. One of the things that fascinated me when I first met him was he was shorter than me.
Yes,
His
sir.
hands were smaller than mine.
Yes, sir.
And softer, but his hands felt like bricks. So that's what impressed me. That was my first impression of Professor V when I met him.
Okay, so you just shared something with me that I wasn't knowledgeable of. You said your father had his own dojo?
Yes, well, actually, my father trained with Professor V at 567 Nostrand Avenue. There was a dojo there. It was the Bedford-Stuyvesant Jiu-Jitsu and Judo Club.
Yes, sir.
And so my father studied there, and it was owned by Judge Phillip, who was, who at some point in time told Professor V, in fact, it was that year that I came, he told Professor V he didn't need him anymore because he, got promoted to 5th Dan, and he felt that he had enough rank. So what he decided to do was he was going to start his own system. And so, and I know some people who live in Brooklyn probably seen the sign. It says Gorilla. So he had the Gorilla, he was establishing a guerrilla system. So my father and a couple of other students.
Hold on. Gorilla as in the animal gorilla,
As
or
in the
gorilla
animal.
as in guerrilla warfare?
Gorilla as in the animal gorilla.
Okay, continue.
Okay. But maybe his intention was guerrilla warfare, but really it was a gorilla.
Yes, sir.
So, so at that time, a lot of people left, including my father. And my father went and established a school on Park Place between Vanderbilt and Flatbush. So basically, a lot of the students left and went under my father, and so that's when my father started.
Yes, sir. Oh, that's great. That's awesome. That's awesome. you said something that sparked. This is not even part of the question, but we're having a conversation. Why is it that, now you said this individual was a fifth dan, go down. However, why is it that most students, when they become a black belt, shodan, the beginning of serious training, they think that they have arrived and they want to break away from their teacher and start their own system? What do you think causes that?
Well, what I've learned over the years is that you never really know people until they get what they want.
Mm. You see, this is why we're doing this interview, because that's wisdom. That's the type of information that we need. See, the martial arts is not just kicks, punches, blocks, sweeps, and throws. It's wisdom. It's knowledge, wisdom, understanding, spirituality. That statement he made, very true. I learned that in life. But continue.
Yes. So, so some people, just come just to become a black belt. Then there are those people who just want the knowledge and they just, and they pretty much love their system and they stay loyal to it.
Yes, sir.
So, but you never know while you're training them, while you're teaching them. But like I said, once people get what they want, you find out who they are.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. So, your father, Harold Stewart, was he just a sensei? Was he a shihan?
No, he was just a sensei
Okay.
at the time. And Professor V used to come down to his school like 2 or 3 times a week. And he would, teach us different. In fact, at that time, he was just starting to introduce the Arnis part of the system. So that was when it was the name V Arnis Jiu-Jitsu was just sort of coming.
I'm glad you brought that, because that's my second training. How was the training with Grand Professor V? How were the classes? What were some of the drills and some of the techniques and lessons that he taught? And how did it feel to even just be in his presence?
Well, yeah, I felt like
pain.
Yeah, it was definitely painful, but a lot of what we did back then was a lot of, let's just say, repetition. Yes, so it was a lot of repetitive focus punching, focus kicking. The judo, you had to know all of the judo throws and submission holds. But the system was more hard style entry. So basically, we would come in with the block as opposed to, this is before the touch and go.
Yes, sir. Teach.
So it was more of that going on at that time. Yes, sir. Okay. But it was very, very painful.
Yes, sir. Okay. In Sanukis, we have what's called the Pia forms, which actually is the foundation of the system. The 9 Pia forms represent the 9-point system that Doc showed to Grand Professor V when he was requesting a blessing to go out on his own. Within those forms, you understand Doc's movement and the foundation of Sanukis. But in V-Jitsu, or VAJ, you all have what's called the V-Jitsu Teis, which I believe are the foundation. Right. Can you talk to us about those, can I call them forms, or just call them the Teis? Were those forms designed to help you train without a partner, or to understand Professor V's mind and his ability? What's your, can you educate us on that?
Well, first off, and this is just from my perspective, my interpretation.
Yes, sir.
The V-Jitsu Teis are an amalgamation of the different art forms that Professor V studied. So the V-Jitsu Teis themselves are different, address different scenarios.
Yes, sir.
In terms of combat. So what Professor V did was took the ingredients from each of the different art forms that he studied and he put them into the Teis. It's kind of like taking a picture. And that's a snapshot of the different art forms that he studied.
Right.
And so therefore, if you take the Vijitsu Teis apart, one by one, take each technique, each Te number 1, Te number 2, and you will see a little bit of the Wing Chun, you'll see a little bit of the Kung Tao, you'll see a little bit of the Kempo, you'll see different forms that he studied.
Yes,
so when you take it apart, you can see how it makes up the rudiments of BJJ.
Wow. So what about today in 2020? What are you doing with the Teis now?
Professor Dave has modified it. Let's just say that we've taken it from the traditional sense, and Professor V always encouraged that anyway, to create. And he made Teis for the street. So we have Vijitsu Teis for the street, in addition to the Vijitsu Teis. So basically, we've taken the Vijitsu Teis and brought it to today's times.
Yes, sir.
So,
yes, sir.
I mean, I'm quite sure if Professor V were alive today, we would have to address COVID.
Yes, sir.
And it would be something with the mask.
And as you can see, I'm in compliance. I have a mask on because we want to be good examples of safety and wanting for your brother what you want for yourself.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Great. Okay. A little history here. I was a part of this, and I would like you to speak on it. In the 90s, I believe it was, or late 90s, there was an attempt to bring Sanukis Ryu and Vijitsu back together, not as one system, but a family, to show this is where Sanukis came from, and we respect and honor where we came from, and to give the Vijitsu practitioners an understanding of Sanukis. Tell us about how that started, some of the problems that arose from it, and what was your interaction with Doc during that time?
I think you're referring to when we used to have the seminars at 25 Park Place, which is the Vijitsu, Sanukis, and Kumite Ryu seminars. Yes, I mean, I didn't really have much interactions with Doc. My interactions with Doc was, just very casual.
Yes, sir.
But in terms of me, sitting down and having a conversation with him, I never did have a long conversation with him until Professor Dave and I went up to his house and we had dinner. We spent the day with him, so that was interesting.
Yes, sir.
But back then, we would share, everyone would get on the floor and share their knowledge, and it kind of like gave us a perspective of what was going on with the Kumite Ryu system and how its approach to certain scenarios, and the same thing with Sanukis and Vijitsu. So we kind of like, shared the same mat and, kind of like exchanged knowledge.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It didn't last too long.
Yes.
but it, it was at least kind of like a step in the right direction to kind of like see where the three systems were. But there was something that happened around that time to me that was interesting, and that was Doc was coming. I was on the mat, kind of like off to the side.
Yes, sir.
Doc was coming out of the locker room, and I heard something hit the floor. So he's walking, so I looked. So I said, he dropped something. So I go over, and it was a knife.
Yes, sir.
So I pick it up, and I start to head towards him.
Yes, sir.
And I see, his officers, everybody,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And I said, I don't know if this is a test. I don't know what this is about. I put the knife back down. I walked over to him with my hands, And I said, excuse me, Doc. I said, I think you dropped something.
Yes, sir. Yes,
he said, oh, I did? Oh, thanks a lot, bro. Thanks a lot. And I said to myself, now, was that a test for me? Or was that for, you know,
right.
his people?
Right.
You know, you see the brother come up to me with a knife and hand it to me. Y'all, where y'all at?
Right. Yes, sir. And that's how Doc was.
Where y'all at?
Yeah.
I said, I don't know what that's about, but I'm glad that I thought about it before I acted. So that's one thing that sticks out, an incident that happened at the time.
Sir. Okay, very good. Okay. It's been said that Grand Professor V made a statement, Moses, you have surpassed me. Now, some people say, oh, he didn't say it. Some people say he did say it. But most people don't ask, why did he say it? So, with this question on the table, why do you think Grand Professor V would make a statement to Doc, who was his student? Because most martial arts instructors make sure they keep their students on a certain level. I'm the teacher, you're the student. Stay in your place.
Right.
It's unheard of to hear a high-level master make a statement of exaltation of their student. So, what's your take on that? Knowing Professor V, what do you think?
Well, I mean, if that's what he said, I would definitely, I understand why he would say that, and that's because Professor V used to, and this is to most of the high-ranking students, he would say, listen, I give you something, and I want you to do something with it. When I show you a technique, I want you to take that technique, and I want you to make something of it. I want you to take it and go above and beyond
Yes, sir.
what I'm showing you.
Yes, sir.
He says, in order for the system to grow, you know, you have to allow for different scenarios.
Yes, sir. So
he says, you know, these variations are important. He says, and what you do, he says, you have to make it a part of you.
Yes, sir.
So what I want you to do, what I show you, I want you to take it, I want you to learn it, and I want you to then tailor it to fit you.
Exactly what Doc used to teach us. Yes,
and
sir.
he used to say, I want you to go above and beyond what I teach you.
Yes, sir.
And so, to me, based on the question that you just asked, I can see him making such a statement because, you know, that's what he used to say. He wanted his students to excel. He wanted his students to exceed him. He wanted them to become better than he was.
Yes, sir. Yes,
so, you know, so that tends to make sense because that's, you know, how he used to,
yes, sir.
give us that message on the mat all the time.
Okay.
So,
that's great.
there's one thing that you said in the very beginning. You said that you wanted to make sure that that up and coming students,
yes, sir,
you know, understood and that they would get some, let's just say, wisdom or things that Professor V.
That was my next question, but go
right.
ahead.
So Professor V used to say, each technique has 1,000 variations.
Yes, sir.
And what I'm showing you is only one way. And what he used to use for an analogy was music.
Mm-hmm.
He used to say there's 7 notes, but yet they're endless compositions.
Yes, sir. Very good. Good
And
teaching.
he said, so what I want you to do is I want you to look at martial arts that way.
Yes, sir.
Because martial arts is endless.
Yes, sir.
He said, so don't limit yourself to just the 7 notes.
Yes, sir. Yes,
You know,
sir.
so whenever whenever, what was interesting, and I thought was very humbling, was Professor V used to say, I like that. Can I borrow that?
Yes, sir.
And you're like, yes, sir, but I think I did it wrong. No. I said, but I didn't do what you asked.
Right.
He said, no, but that was good. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I want to borrow that.
Yes, sir.
And you're like, yeah, sure, Professor, you can have it. But he was that humble. He was always learning.
Yes, sir.
Always learning. Although he was the teacher of teachers, didn't matter. He's still learning. He's learning from color belts, from any.
Yes, sir.
Any
yes,
of
sir.
the, so
yes, sir.
that I found was very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's important that people know that Professor V was a teacher and he was a student.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, great. Let me ask you this. Doc, for lack of a better word, left Vjitsu and went out and developed his own system.
Right.
Son Lucas.
Mm-hmm.
He also received a blessing from Grand Professor V to do such a thing. Can you tell us what Doc's relationship, like just briefly tell us the relationship between Doc and Grand Professor V. Then briefly tell us the relationship between Grand Professor V and David James. And what do you think Doc saw in Professor James that he made him the one to take on his system when he was gone, after he was gone?
Well, Professor Dave, as far as the relationship between Doc and Professor V, I wasn't there for that, but understanding the relationship between Professor V and Professor Dave, what Professor V saw in Professor Dave, and this is just my point of view.
Yes, sir.
But Professor Dave, Professor V used to say to Professor Dave that you have my basics.
Yes, sir.
You know my basics. Don't worry, because Professor Dave used to, just to flip out whenever Professor V would go over here and teach, and he said, Professor, they're using you, and it turned out that, they wouldn't pay him and stuff like that.
Right.
And so he would really get upset when Professor V would go out and, and people would basically waste his time,
yes,
take
sir.
his information.
Right. Yes, sir.
So, that was something that, that Professor Dave used to get all upset. But Professor V would always say, it's okay. They don't have my basics. You do.
Very good.
So he understood who knew his rudiments that person can create, because as long as you know the foundation,
yes, sir.
From there you build your house.
Yes, sir.
So he used to always say that. So him choosing Professor Dave for the V Arnis Jitsu portion of his system,
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of like a no-brainer there. Professor Dave showed his loyalty. In opening up Park Place, he had to sell his cars, his motorcycles, got rid of his detail business. He put everything on the line.
In other words, he sacrificed to help the system grow and to make sure it was maintained.
Right.
And that's a principle that is missing in today's martial arts.
Yes.
There's no loyalty. There's no, I belong. I'm a part of this. This art is me.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like some kids play baseball, then next season they play basketball, then they play soccer. But martial arts is a way of life.
Right.
So the sacrifice you make for your teacher and your art is similar to the sacrifice you make for your wife and your children.
Exactly.
Yes,
exactly.
That's beautiful.
And
beautiful.
so and what people don't realize is that when we opened up Park Place,
mm-hmm.
Park Place wasn't Professor David James' school. It was Professor V's school.
Yes, sir.
So the school was opened up for Professor V.
Yes, sir.
And we got the neon sign for Professor B's name across it.
Yes.
And for Professor B to come and teach privately or a group of people, anybody he wanted, it was his school. We
Yes,
just
sir.
ran it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And so, and that's what we always used to say, this is the headquarters, Professor B, this is yours.
Yes, sir.
So,
Beautiful, beautiful.
so to have someone do that for you, you know, I mean, that's like a diamond in the rough.
Yes, sir.
You know,
Yes, sir.
so,
Beautiful.
you know, so that was why I believe, you know, he chose David Jameson to be on his Jitsu part. There were also people back in the 90s used to say, well, I'm doing the real Jitsu.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah. So, so for those who are doing the real Jiu-Jitsu, they're doing the, you know, Jiu-Jitsu 65, Jiu-Jitsu 75. Well, you take that. So that's where he, Professor B, decided to parcel out
Yes, sir.
his system.
Wow. That's history. That's history that a lot of people don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there are a lot of questions like, well, why would he break his system up that way? That's.
But he, Professor B, knew that he accumulated bodies of knowledge, let's just say in the 60s. And so therefore, he knew he was going to, because the system is organic.
Yes, sir.
And it's supposed to grow. It's a living, breathing thing.
Yes, sir.
And so the Jiu-Jitsu 65, you know, contained all of the knowledge that he acquired up until that point. Mm-hmm. And in the 70s, he continued his studies. So Jiu-Jitsu 75. And so Professor B was always changing the name to reflect the difference. That I'm not doing what I was doing 10 years ago.
Yes, sir.
So,
exactly.
you know, if you didn't miss the train, you better get on board, because we're about
Yes,
to do some 70s and some 80s and 90s stuff.
Yes,
so,
sir.
you know, so that's what he decided to do. I don't know whether you may want to, maybe want to edit this part, but Professor B, when he decided that he was going to name successors, Professor B knew he was dying.
Mm.
Now, this is how it was. It was just the weirdest, the strangest things. He came in. At that time he used to make collages of different things, and he would bring it to the school and say, here, and you know, to have different clippings from different magazines and stuff, and he would give it out to the students. And so one day he comes in and he says, yes, I'm not going to be here, you know, too much longer. So I want to make sure that I let everybody know that you're going to take the system, the Beyond Jiu-Jitsu. And Professor Dave's like, oh, come on, Professor. Yeah.
Right.
And so I'm sitting down with Professor, he's telling me, he says, you know, I'm not going to be here much longer. I said, so where are you going? You going to Florida?
Right.
You know, he's like, no, I'm just not gonna be around. He says, you know, I'm gonna have to leave. I said, so where are you going? He says, no, you don't understand. He says, it's my time.
Mm.
And so I said, well, what do you mean your time? He says, well, you kind of know. He said, I just know that I'm not going to be here. I said, does anything hurt? He says, no. So I told him, I said, okay, my father used to tell me that people know when it's time to go.
Yes, sir.
And you can always tell because they're always doing something. Either subconsciously they know, not consciously,
Right.
but subconsciously
Yes, sir.
they know.
Yes, sir.
And so there, and you'll always find that they did something a little awkward before they passed.
Yes, sir.
So so I asked Professor B, explain that to me. I said, I want to know how you know.
Mm-hmm.
He says, well, it's not something that you feel. It's not something that hurts. It's not something that you feel. He said, it's just the act of knowing.
Mm.
He says, and I know that my time is up.
Yes, sir.
And let's just say, you know, within a year he was gone.
Right.
And so, but at that time, I went and spoke to Professor Dave. I said, listen, if he's serious, and he's talking about giving you the system, and he's giving this one that part of the system. I said, we need to make that formal.
Yes, sir.
So we had the retirement seminar for him.
Yes, sir.
And that's where he, in front of witnesses, in front of everybody,
yes,
he named,
yes, sir.
you know, who's going to take what. But that's a process.
Yes, sir.
So really, when it comes to like successors and stuff like that, I mean, it's just not, you know, say, well, you're the one.
Right.
Because
right,
like I said,
right,
you know,
right.
people, you know, people change on you.
Yes, sir. Yes,
they
sir.
get what
Yes,
they
sir.
want.
Yes, sir.
So yeah, so I think, you know, Professor V was ready to, you know, he knew he was going to be leaving, so he had enough time to do that.
Yes, sir. Yes,
you know,
sir.
and some of us, many of us, don't have the time to determine, you know, it's time for me to turn over the pizza shop to my son, to my daughter instead of
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
that sort of thing, you know. So,
right.
So yeah, so I think that that's something that a lot of people don't realize, that there was a process. He felt that it was time for him to go.
Yes, sir.
And he decided that he was going to,
wow.
you know, name
that's powerful.
his successors.
Oh, well, okay. On that same note, so Dr. Moses Powell, one of his most famous students, as it's documented, actually was around when Grand Professor V started naming his successors.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Doc, again, was known as one of his most famous students. He left Vijitsu, started his own thing, but he never once was arrogant enough to think that he could come back to Vijitsu and say, hey, I'm back, I'm taking over.
Mm-hmm.
He witnessed Grand Professor V name successors, documentation,
Right.
to show it.
Right.
Doc was a very wise man. He was streetwise, and he did things for effect.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that his teacher, who he loved, named successors while he was still here, why do you think that Dr. Moses Powell never documented who, or documented and named who his successor would be?
And shouldn't that be a question I would ask you?
This is your interview. This is your interview.
I mean, I wouldn't know the answer to that.
No, why do you think he would not have done it?
Well, I think maybe, perhaps, Doc may have run out of time. Because if you think about it, to name a successor is a process. You have to vet and you know, put this one in charge of the pizza shop, and say, okay, and for a week while you're gone, you put that one in charge, and you're kind of like testing the waters to see who holds up.
Yes, sir.
And so, and also you see, you know, who's more dedicated, who's more committed. So that's a process, especially when you have so many people under you.
Yes,
or so many people that you train,
yes,
like Doc has. So, I mean, he had to go through a hell of a vetting process,
yes,
just
sir,
to figure out,
yes, sir,
you know. So, but, and it's not like he, like Professor V. Professor V knew that he wasn't sick or anything,
right,
but he knew that his time was up.
Yes, sir.
So therefore, he started to prepare. And so I don't think that Doc was prepared, you know, to leave this earth, you know, and have his work undone.
Yes, sir.
So I just think that from my point of view, it just sounds like it was, you know, his work was not finished.
Yes, sir.
You know, because prior to Professor V having the retirement party and us saying that, you know, him telling us that he's not going to be here, he wants to name successors. 2 years before that, was Professor V ready to name successors? Probably not.
Right.
You know, so he had to figure it out.
Gotcha.
So that's, you know, so that's what I would say. That's what I think happened.
Okay. All right.
I don't know for sure.
Here's a good question for you. I know you can answer this one. what legacy would you, Shion Scott, like to leave for your students and students that aren't even in the martial arts now, but will be one day? What legacy and what wisdom would you like to share with them? And have you thought about who your successor would be? And if yes, have you prepared them and tested them, and are they aware that they are your successor? I know that's a lot.
That's a lot. That's a lot for my. It's crammed all in my head. In terms of a legacy that I would leave, I would say to give back, because just like a fisherman, you go out to the ocean, you catch fish, and once you got your catch for today,
yes, sir,
you take the bait and you throw it back in the water to get back to the place from which you take it.
Teach, beautiful.
So it's important that we give back to the place where we've acquired so much knowledge.
Yes, sir.
And so in terms of giving back to people who want to study and want to train and get the information, and to pass that information on, it's important that we know that, you know, people need to get this information, and so therefore giving back is one of the important things that I see. It's very important to me.
Yes, sir.
That I give back. So sharing Professor V's teachings, sharing Professor Dave's teachings. Professor Dave has proven himself not just to Professor V, but he continues to keep adding, to keep the system current.
Yes, sir.
And that's giving back.
Yes, sir.
Because so I'm just doing my part.
Yes, sir.
But it's important that we instill in the students to give back, because those are the ones that take the black belt and they run.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yes,
and
sir.
they don't give back to the teacher when you say, well, who did you study with? They're like, oh, no, I studied a little with this one, a little bit with that one, but, this is mine now.
Yes, sir.
They rename the system and
Yes,
call
sir.
it their own.
Yes, sir.
So that's my, I would say my legacy is to give back. As far as, now, I think you had two more questions that
I tell you,
went over my head.
It's okay. I tell you what. Let's do a part 2.
Okay.
Because I'm sure the listening audience felt what you were saying. They appreciated the wisdom and the knowledge and the history that you gave, and they would love to hear from you again. I don't want to have long, drawn-out interviews. I want it to be just enough to make somebody say, I want to hear more from him. So with that in mind, for those who want to get to know you better, maybe even learn from you, can you tell us where you're located, where your dojo is, your hours and things of that nature? So
yes.
That way they can...
My dojo is located in Staten Island. The address is 2098 Clove Road. And my hours are, well, let's just say right now this is COVID, but my hours were from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Yes, sir.
And from 10 a.m. to 12 noon on Saturdays.
Okay, good. Well, Shion Scott, I want to thank you. Hopefully we can do a part 2 so you can give some more information. Appreciate you, sir. Us.
Thank you.
You heard it from Shion Scott, VAJ at its best, longtime student of Grand Professor V. Remember, tune in to my YouTube page, Quiet Storm Dojo, and tune in to my Facebook page, Sanuka Skills and Drills. We have a lot more to give you. We have other masters that we've interviewed, and you're going to love it. Thank you again. Us.